The scorching heat of the summer of 1876 had parched the Wyoming territory for weeks, turning the once lush grasslands surrounding Sheridan into a golden tinderbox that awaited only a spark. Zara Zimmerman stood frozen on the crest of a hill, watching in horror as the wall of flames devoured the valley below, cutting off the path back to her homestead and trapping her on the wrong side of safety. Zara had come to Wyoming 3 months prior, determined to forge her own path after the death of her parents left her with nothing but an inheritance too small for Boston society and a spirit too large for its confines. At 22, she had purchased a modest plot of land just outside Sheridan, defying everyone who said a woman couldn't manage alone. Now, as she watched the wildfire surge across the landscape, she feared they might have been right. The flames advanced with terrifying speed, consuming everything in their path. Smoke billowed into the sky, turning the afternoon sun into a hazy red orb. Zara's horse, spooked by the approaching inferno, had bolted an hour earlier, leaving her stranded. She had attempted to outrun the fire on foot, climbing higher in hopes of finding a route of escape, but the blaze had outflanked her, cutting off every path of retreat. Clutching her skirts, she scrambled higher up the rocky slope, lungs burning from the smoke, eyes watering as she frantically searched for any means of salvation. The heat pressed against her back like a physical force, and the roar of the flames drowned out even her own panicked thoughts. "Keep moving," she shouted to herself, her voice lost in the inferno's hungry growl. The rocky outcropping above might provide temporary shelter, but she knew the fire would likely sweep over it. Her chances were dwindling by the second. Miles away, at the Triple K Ranch, Tucker Kincaid stood on the porch of the main house, watching the distant smoke with growing concern. At 27, Tucker had spent nearly a decade building his cattle operation into one of the most respected in the territory. The son of a Texas rancher, he'd come north after the war with nothing but determination and a talent for breaking difficult horses. "That fire's heading straight for the East Valley," his foreman, Frank Wilson, said as he stepped up beside him. "Wind's pushing it fast." Tucker nodded grimly. "Round up the men. We need to get the cattle moved to the north pasture." His eyes narrowed as he calculated the fire's path. "And send someone to warn the settlers on the eastern properties." "Already done. Miller rode out 20 minutes ago." Frank hesitated. "What about that new place?" "The woman who bought the old Gardner plot." Tucker's jaw tightened. He'd met Zara Zimmerman only once, when she'd come to purchase supplies in town. She'd been polite but reserved, making it clear she intended to make her own way without assistance. Her independence had intrigued him, though he'd kept his distance, respecting her apparent wish for solitude. "I'll ride that way myself," Tucker said, already striding toward the stables. "Get the men moving." Within minutes, he'd saddled Thunderbolt, his powerful black stallion, and was galloping eastward, the smoke growing thicker as he rode. The heat intensified, and soon flecks of ash were raining down around him. When he reached the rise overlooking Zara's property, his heart sank. The small cabin appeared intact, but flames already surrounded it on 3 sides, consuming the field she had worked so hard to cultivate. "Miss Zimmerman," he called out, approaching as close as he dared. There was no response. The cabin door stood open, suggesting she had fled, but in which direction? Making a split-second decision, Tucker urged Thunderbolt around the edge of the fire line, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The smoke stung his eyes, and he tied his bandana over his nose and mouth, pressing onward despite the growing danger. It was pure chance that he spotted her. A flash of blue fabric against the rocky hillside, nearly a mile beyond the homestead. Tucker watched in horror as the flames surged toward her position, recognizing immediately that she was trapped. Without hesitation, Tucker spurred Thunderbolt forward, charting a course through the narrowest part of the fire line. The stallion balked initially, instinct warning against the unnatural barrier, but years of trust between horse and rider prevailed. With a mighty leap, Thunderbolt carried Tucker through a gap in the wall of flame, his coat singeing from the intense heat. "Hold on, Miss Zimmerman," Tucker shouted, though he knew she couldn't hear him over the fire's deafening roar. Zara had given up hope. The flames had circled around the base of the hill, cutting off her final escape route. The smoke made breathing increasingly difficult, and exhaustion pulled at her limbs. She sank to her knees on the rocky ground, wondering if anyone in Sheridan would even notice she was gone. After a lifetime of belonging nowhere, perhaps this lonely hill would be her final resting place. Through the smoke and tears clouding her vision, Zara at first thought the approaching rider was a hallucination, a final comfort conjured by her desperate mind. It wasn't until the powerful black horse thundered up the slope toward her that she realized salvation was at hand. "Miss Zimmerman," a deep voice called. "Take my hand." Tucker extended his arm as he maneuvered Thunderbolt alongside her. Zara didn't hesitate. With the last of her strength, she reached up, her fingers closing around his wrist. In one powerful motion, Tucker pulled her up behind him on the saddle. "Hold tight," he commanded, and Zara wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his back as he turned the horse back toward the advancing flames. "We can't go that way," she cried, seeing the wall of fire that now blocked their path. "Trust me," Tucker replied grimly. "Thunderbolt can get us through." He leaned forward, speaking soothing words to his mount as they charged down the slope. The horse gathered speed, and Zara closed her eyes, certain they were galloping to their deaths. She felt Tucker's body tense as they approached the fire line, heard him urge the stallion forward, and then came the heart-stopping moment of heat so intense it seemed to scorch her very soul. A leap, a moment suspended in hell itself, and then miraculously they were through. Thunderbolt's powerful stride carried them beyond the worst of the flames, though embers and smoke still swirled around them. Tucker didn't slow their pace until they had put considerable distance between themselves and the fire, finally reining in near a small creek where the ground was too damp to burn easily. "Are you hurt?" Tucker asked, turning in the saddle to look at her once they had stopped. Zara, still clinging to him, could barely speak through her coughing. "I'm alive," she managed. "Thanks to you." He helped her down from the saddle, steadying her as her legs threatened to buckle. Up close, she could see that his face was smudged with soot, a small burn marking one cheek. His eyes, a striking blue against the grime, assessed her with concern. "You need water," he said, leading her to the creek. Zara fell to her knees, scooping the cool liquid to her parched lips and splashing some on her face. The relief was immediate and profound. "My cabin?" she asked after a moment, though she already knew the answer. Tucker's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry, Miss Zimmerman. The fire had nearly surrounded it when I rode past." Zara nodded, absorbing this devastating news with a stoicism that surprised even her. Perhaps she was simply too exhausted for tears. "Everything I had was in that cabin," she said quietly. "You're alive," Tucker replied firmly. "That's what matters. The rest can be rebuilt." As they rested by the creek, allowing Thunderbolt to drink and cool down, Tucker introduced himself properly. "Tucker Kincaid, madam. My ranch is about 5 miles west of your property." "Zara Zimmerman," she replied, though she suspected he already knew her name. "I believe we met briefly in town some weeks ago," he nodded. "At Henderson's general store, you were buying seeds." She was surprised he remembered such a detail. I was trying to get a late crop planted. A bitter laugh escaped her. So much for that effort. Tucker studied her for a moment. If you don't mind my asking, Miss Zimmerman, what brought you all the way out here from? He paused, clearly trying to place her accent. Boston, she supplied. And it's a long story, Mr. Kincaid. One that hardly matters now that I've lost everything. Not everything, he countered. You still have your determination. I saw plenty of that when you first arrived in Sheridan, turning down offers of help left and right. Despite herself, Zara felt a smile tug at her lips. You noticed that, did you? The whole town noticed. It's not often we get a young woman arriving alone, buying property and setting up a homestead without so much as asking for directions. I had directions, Zara protested mildly. And a map. Tucker smiled, the expression transforming his sooty face. Of course you did. As they sat there, the distant roar of the fire began to fade, the wind shifting to push the flames away from them, toward the barren plains where there was little fuel to sustain them. We should head back to town, Tucker said eventually, offering his hand to help her up. You can get cleaned up and rest at the hotel. Zara hesitated, looking down at her soot-stained dress, torn and ruined beyond repair. I have no money for a hotel, Mr. Kincaid. Everything I had was in that cabin. Tucker considered this problem. My sister Alice lives in town with her husband. She's about your size. I'm sure she'd be happy to lend you some clothes and give you a place to stay until you decide what to do next. Pride warred with practicality in Zara's mind. She had come west determined to rely on no one, to prove she could make her own way in the world. Now, not even 4 months into her new life, she was facing complete destitution. I can't impose, she began. You wouldn't be imposing, Tucker insisted. Alice has been complaining about having no female friends in Sheridan. You'd be doing her a favor. Zara doubted this very much, but found herself too exhausted to argue further. Very well, Mr. Kincaid. I accept your kind offer, though I insist on finding some way to repay your family's generosity as soon as possible. Tucker helped her mount Thunderbolt, then climbed up behind her, taking the reins. The position was intimate, his arms around her to hold the reins, his chest solid against her back. Zara told herself the warmth spreading through her was merely relief at her rescue, nothing more. As they rode toward town, taking a wide berth around the still burning sections of the valley, Zara found herself strangely calm despite the disaster that had befallen her. She had survived. She would rebuild. And the man who had risked his life to save hers seemed determined to ensure she wasn't alone in that process. Perhaps, she reflected as Sheridan's buildings came into view, the West wasn't entirely the solitary frontier she had imagined it to be. Alice Kincaid Marshall proved to be everything her brother had promised: warm, welcoming, and insistent on helping Zara despite her protests. The young woman, barely a year older than Zara herself, had practically pulled her from Thunderbolt's back and hustled her into the modest but comfortable house she shared with her husband, the town's blacksmith. "Tucker, you're filthy," was Alice's greeting to her brother. "Both of you look like you've been dragged through hell itself." "James, heat water for baths, please," her husband, a mountain of a man with gentle eyes, immediately set to the task without complaint, stoking the kitchen fire and bringing in buckets of water from the well out back. "Alice, Miss Zimmerman needs clothes," Tucker explained, "and a place to stay. The fire took her homestead." Alice's blue eyes, so like her brother's, widened with sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear, of course you'll stay with us. We have a spare room that's hardly used except when this lummox visits from his ranch." She gestured at Tucker with obvious affection. "I can't possibly," Zara began. "You can and you will," Alice interrupted firmly. Now let's get you cleaned up and into something that isn't half burned." Within the hour, Zara found herself bathed, dressed in a borrowed calico dress that fit reasonably well, and seated at the marshal's kitchen table with a bowl of stew in front of her. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips, and then she found herself eating with an enthusiasm that might have embarrassed her under other circumstances. Tucker, also cleaned up and in fresh clothes he apparently kept at his sister's house, sat across from her, watching with approval as she ate. "The fire won't burn forever," he said. "In a few days, we can ride out and see what might be salvaged from your property." "I doubt there will be much," Zara replied, trying to keep the despair from her voice. "The cabin was small and nearly everything I owned was inside it." "The land is still yours," James Marshall pointed out, "and land is the one thing that can't burn away." "True," Zara admitted. "But rebuilding requires money, and I used nearly all I had to purchase the property and materials for the first cabin." A silence fell over the table as everyone contemplated this dilemma. Finally, Alice spoke up. "Henderson at the general store is looking for help. His wife is expecting their third child and can't manage the books and the counter anymore." Zara considered this. She was well educated, certainly capable of keeping accounts. "That's actually a very good suggestion. Thank you, Mrs. Marshall." "Alice, please," the other woman insisted. "And it's settled. You'll stay with us, work for Henderson, and save to rebuild. By spring, you could have a new cabin ready." It was a sensible plan, one that Zara might have come to herself given time. Yet she felt a strange reluctance, as though accepting meant surrendering some part of the independence she had cherished. "I'd be happy to help with the rebuilding," Tucker said, as though reading her thoughts. "My men and I. Not charity," he added quickly when he saw her expression. "We help each other out here. That's how the West works. You'd do the same for any of us." Zara wanted to argue that point she had specifically come west to avoid being obligated to anyone, but found she couldn't. If their positions were reversed, wouldn't she offer the same assistance? "Wasn't that basic human decency rather than charity? Thank you," she said simply. "All of you. I'm not accustomed to accepting help, but I'm grateful for it." Tucker's eyes met hers across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or the beginning of one. "We're not so different, Miss Zimmerman. I came here with nothing but determination too." "And look at him now," Alice said proudly, "one of the most successful ranchers in the territory." Tucker looked embarrassed. "Hardly that, but I've made a good start. How long have you been in Sheridan?" Zara asked, genuinely curious. 7 years, Tucker replied. "Came up from Texas after the war. Worked as a hand on several ranches, saved every penny, then bought a small parcel when land opened up here. Built from there." It was, Zara realized, not so different from what she had hoped to do. Begin small, work hard, build something meaningful. The fire had been a setback, but perhaps not the end of her dream. "Well," she said with more confidence than she felt, "I suppose I'll simply have to start again." Tucker's smile was warm with approval. "That's the spirit." The next morning, Zara accompanied Alice to Henderson's general store, where the proprietor was indeed eager for help. Within an hour, she had secured employment, with wages that, while modest, would allow her to save toward rebuilding if she was careful. "You're a godsend, Miss Zimmerman," Mr. Henderson declared after watching her quickly organize his chaotic ledger. "Been meaning to get these accounts in order for months." "I'm happy to be of service," Zara replied, feeling a small spark of pride. Her father had been an accountant in Boston, and she had learned much from him before his death. It was satisfying to put those skills to use. When she returned to the Marshalls' home that evening, she found Tucker waiting, his horse tied up outside. "Good news," he said as she approached. The fire's mostly burned itself out. A group of us rode out to check the damage. And my property? Zara asked, steeling herself for the worst. The cabin's gone, he confirmed gently. But your well is intact and the stone foundation could be reused. It's not as bad as it could be. Zara nodded, absorbing this information. When can I go see it? Sunday, if you'd like. I can escort you. I would appreciate that, Mr. Kincaid. Tucker, he said. If we're to be neighbors, you might as well use my given name. Tucker, she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. And you should call me Zara. His smile brightened his entire face. Zara it is. That Sunday dawned clear and cool, the first hint of autumn tempering the summer heat. Tucker arrived at the marshal's home just after breakfast, and Zara was ready, wearing a practical riding skirt Alice had altered for her. The ride to her property took nearly an hour, during which Zara found herself increasingly comfortable in Tucker's company. He was knowledgeable about the territory, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local history. More than that, he listened when she spoke, showing genuine interest in her ideas and experiences. "What made you leave Boston?" he asked as they approached the burned area. All around them the landscape was blackened, though here and there, green shoots had already begun to emerge from the scorched earth. Zara considered how to answer. "My parents died within months of each other, 2 years ago. Father of heart failure, mother of pneumonia. I was their only child and suddenly found myself alone with a modest inheritance and no real place in society." "I'm sorry for your loss," Tucker said quietly. "Thank you." Zara paused, gathering her thoughts. "I spent a year trying to make a life there, taking in sewing, giving piano lessons to children of families who had once been my parents' peers. But Boston has rigid expectations for unmarried women. I was constantly reminded of my reduced circumstances. So you decided to head west." "I read about the Homestead Act in a newspaper. The idea of owning land, building something that was entirely mine. It seemed like freedom," she laughed softly. "Perhaps it was naive." "Not naive," Tucker replied seriously. "Brave. Most women wouldn't have attempted what you did. Most women wouldn't have lost everything to a wildfire within 3 months, Zara countered wryly. "Most women wouldn't have survived that wildfire," Tucker reminded her. "You kept your head, climbed to high ground. Many would have panicked and been overtaken." His praise warmed her more than it should have. "Nevertheless, I'm back at the beginning." "Not quite," Tucker said as they crested a rise and her property came into view. "You have experience now and friends." Zara's throat tightened as she looked down at the blackened remains of her cabin. The stone foundation stood starkly against the charred ground, and the well, as Tucker had said, appeared intact. But everything else, her furniture, clothes, the seeds she had purchased for next year's planting, the small library of books she had carefully transported from Boston, all gone. Tucker dismounted and came to help her down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "It looks worse than it is," he said gently. "The land will recover. By spring, this will all be green again." Zara walked slowly through the ruins, picking up a charred piece of wood here, a blackened metal pot there. "I had so many plans for this place," she said softly. "You still can," Tucker insisted. "The foundation is good. We could have a new cabin up before the first snow." She turned to him, struck by the "we" in his statement. "You would help me rebuild, of course," he said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "I told you that's how things work out here. When James and Alice's roof leaked last winter, half the town showed up to fix it. When old man Peterson broke his leg, everyone took turns tending his livestock until he healed. It was a different world from Boston, where appearances often mattered more than substance, and where assistance frequently came with strings attached. Here, it seemed, helping one another was simply part of survival. "I'm not used to depending on others," Zara admitted. Tucker's gaze was steady. "It's not dependency, it's community. And someday you'll do the same for someone else." As they stood amid the ruins of her homestead, Zara felt something shift inside her, a relaxing of the rigid self-sufficiency she had clung to since her parents' deaths. Perhaps there was strength, not weakness, in accepting help when it was offered in good faith. "All right," she said finally. "I accept your help, Tucker, but I insist on doing my part." "I'd expect nothing less," he replied with a smile that made her heart beat just a little faster. Over the next several weeks, as summer yielded to autumn, Zara settled into a routine. During the day, she worked at Henderson's store, gradually bringing order to the chaos of his accounting system. Evenings were spent at the Marshalls, where she helped Alice with cooking and mending, skills she had perfected during her year of reduced circumstances in Boston. On Sundays, Tucker would come to town, and they would ride out to her property to plan the rebuilding. The first time they went to measure the foundation and discuss the new cabin's design, Tucker brought paper and pencils so Zara could sketch her ideas. She surprised him with her detailed drawings and practical considerations. "You've given this a lot of thought," he remarked, studying her sketch of a simple but efficient floor plan. "I learned from my mistakes with the first cabin," Zara explained. The stove was too close to the window, and the door opened directly into the main room, letting in drafts. "This design will be much more practical for winter." Tucker nodded, impressed. "You're a quick study." "I have to be," she replied. "I can't afford to make the same mistakes twice." As they walked the perimeter of the foundation, discussing where to place windows and how to orient the cabin to catch the morning sun, Zara found herself increasingly aware of Tucker as more than just a helpful neighbor. He moved with a quiet confidence, his suggestions thoughtful and never condescending. When their hands accidentally brushed as they examined the well, she felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with practical considerations. Tucker must have felt it too, for he held her gaze a moment longer than necessary before clearing his throat and stepping back. "We'll need to clean out the well before winter sets in," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "Yes," Zara agreed, trying to ignore the warmth in her cheeks. "Of course." October brought the first delivery of lumber for the new cabin, purchased with Zara's carefully saved wages and supplemented by materials Tucker insisted he had lying around unused at his ranch. She suspected this wasn't entirely true, but chose not to challenge him on it. On a crisp Saturday morning, Tucker arrived in town with 4 of his ranch hands, tools loaded in a wagon. They met Zara at her property, where they found several townspeople already waiting. James Marshall, of course, but also Mr. Henderson, the town's doctor, and 3 farmers whose names Zara was still learning. "What's all this?" she asked Tucker in amazement. "I told you." "This is how we do things here," he said with a grin. "Word got around that we were rebuilding today." Under Tucker's direction, the work proceeded with surprising efficiency. The men raised the frame of the cabin while Zara worked alongside them, holding boards steady, passing nails and providing refreshments prepared by Alice and several other women who arrived mid-morning. By sunset, the frame was complete, and the walls had begun to take shape. As the workers gathered around a bonfire, sharing food and stories, Zara found herself seated beside Tucker on a fallen log, slightly apart from the others. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I never expected this." She gestured at the gathered community. Tucker's smile was warm in the firelight. "You're part of Sheridan now, Zara. These people look after their own. I'm beginning to see that." She hesitated, then added, "In Boston, after my parents died, not one of our so-called friends offered real help. There were condolences, of course, and invitations to tea where everyone whispered about my reduced circumstances. But this kind of practical assistance," she shook her head. "Never. Their loss," Tucker said simply. "Anyone who wouldn't help you doesn't deserve to know you." The conviction in his voice made her heart skip. "You barely know me yourself," she pointed out. Tucker turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the flickering light. "I know you had the courage to travel across the country alone. I know you faced a wildfire with more composure than most men would show. I know you've worked tirelessly at Henderson's while planning this rebuild, never once complaining about your situation." His voice softened. "I think I know the important things, Zara Zimmerman." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been growing since that first desperate day of the fire. Zara found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Before either could act on the moment, James called out from the fire, "Tucker, we need your opinion on this bet." The spell broken, Tucker gave her a rueful smile and stood. "Duty calls. But this conversation isn't finished." "No," Zara agreed softly. "I don't believe it is." The cabin progressed rapidly over the following weeks. Every Saturday, workers would gather to continue the construction, and by early November the walls were up, the roof was on, and windows, a generous gift from the town's glazier, were installed. The first snow fell just as they finished the stone chimney, with Tucker and James staying late into the evening to ensure it drew properly. "You could move in by next weekend," Tucker told Zara as they stood inside the completed structure. It was simple but solid, with one main room containing the kitchen and living area, and a small bedroom partitioned off in the back. "We'll need to get you a proper bed and some furniture." "I've been saving for that," Zara said proudly. "Mr. Henderson gave me a bonus for organizing his accounts." "Apparently, I discovered that several customers had outstanding debts he had forgotten about." Tucker chuckled. "I'm not surprised. Old Henderson would forget his own name if Mrs. Henderson didn't remind him." He surveyed the cabin with satisfaction. "It's a good home, Zara. It'll keep you warm this winter." "Our winter," she corrected, feeling a surge of belonging. "I'm a Wyomingite now, or trying to be." "You're doing just fine," Tucker assured her, his gaze warm as it rested on her face. That weekend, as Zara prepared to move into her new home, Alice insisted on hosting a cabin warming party. "It's tradition," she declared when Zara protested. "Everyone brings a small gift to help stock the new home." And so, on a Sunday afternoon, Zara found herself surrounded by well-wishers bearing practical gifts: a set of dishes from Alice and James, cooking utensils from Mrs. Henderson, a handmade quilt from the doctor's wife, and countless jars of preserved foods to see her through the winter. Tucker arrived last, leading a wagon containing a handcrafted bed frame and table he had made himself. "Consider it a proper welcome to Wyoming," he said when she tried to thank him. As the afternoon wound down and guests began to depart, Zara found herself standing on her new porch with Tucker, watching the sunset paint the snow-dusted landscape in shades of gold and pink. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Even after the fire, I can see why you love it." "It grows on you," Tucker agreed, "though I admit it's never seemed quite as beautiful as it does right now." Zara glanced at him, catching the intent in his gaze. "Mr. Kincaid, are you flirting with me?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I believe I am, Miss Zimmerman. Have been for weeks, in fact, though you've been too busy rebuilding your life to notice." "I noticed," she admitted, her cheeks warming despite the chill in the air. "I simply wasn't sure what to do about it." Tucker took a step closer, his expression growing serious. You could start by agreeing to have dinner with me, just the two of us, not a work party or a community gathering. Zara's heart quickened. That sounds suspiciously like courting, Mr. Kincaid. That's exactly what it is, he confirmed, if you're amenable. She considered him this man who had ridden through fire to save her, who had rallied an entire town to help her rebuild, who looked at her not as a curiosity or a charity case, but as an equal worthy of respect. I believe I am amenable, she said, her smile matching his. Very much so. The winter of 1876-1877 proved to be one of the coldest in Wyoming's memory, but Zara hardly noticed the bitter temperatures. Her cabin, thanks to Tucker's insistence on proper insulation and the efficient placement of her stove, remained warm and cozy even during the worst blizzards. True to his word, Tucker courted her properly. Once a week, weather permitting, he would arrive at her cabin on Thunderbolt, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, seeds for her spring garden, or once, a beautiful woolen scarf he had commissioned from a woman in town who was known for her fine knitting. Their courtship progressed with a blend of proper tradition and frontier practicality. When heavy snows made travel difficult, Tucker would sometimes stay for 2 or 3 days, sleeping on a pallet by the fire while Zara took the bedroom. The arrangement might have scandalized Boston society, but in Wyoming, survival trumped propriety, and no one in Sheridan batted an eye. During those snowbound days, they talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Zara learned that Tucker had lost his father in the war and his mother to illness shortly after, leaving him to make his own way at 19. He spoke of his determination to build something lasting, something he could pass down to children someday. "You want children?" he asked her one evening as they sat before the fire, snow piling up outside the windows. Zara considered the question seriously. "I always assumed I would have them eventually. In Boston, that was the expected path: marriage, children, a proper household. But coming west, I think I wanted to prove I could stand on my own first. And have you proven it, I mean?" She smiled, thinking of all she had endured and accomplished in just a few months. "I believe I have, at least to myself, which is what matters most." Tucker nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's what drawn me to you from the start, you know, your determination. Most women would have given up after the fire, gone back east with their tail between their legs. I had nowhere to go back to," Zara pointed out. "We both know that's not true. A woman with your education and bearing could have found a position in Boston, maybe as a governess or companion." He was right, of course. Those options had existed, though they had seemed like cages to her independent spirit. "I suppose I'm too stubborn for my own good." Tucker laughed. "Just stubborn enough, I'd say." As winter deepened, Zara continued working at Henderson's store, adding dressmaking to her services when she discovered many of the town's women had limited access to new clothes. Her skills with a needle, honed during her year of taking and sewing in Boston, proved to be in high demand. "You're becoming quite the entrepreneur," Tucker remarked one evening as he watched her work on a dress for the banker's wife. "First accounting, now dressmaking. What's next?" Zara tied off a neat seam before answering. "I've been thinking about the spring planting. My property has good soil. With proper planning, I could grow more than just food for myself, perhaps supply vegetables to families in town." Tucker's expression grew serious. "You're really planning to stay then, to make a life here?" "Of course," Zara replied, surprised by the question. "Why wouldn't I?" He hesitated, then said carefully, "Some women find frontier life challenging, especially those accustomed to Eastern comforts." Zara set aside her sewing. "Tucker Kincaid, if you're implying I'm too delicate for Wyoming, I must remind you that I survived a wildfire, rebuilt my home, and have endured the worst winter in recent memory without a single complaint." "That's not," he began, then stopped, a smile playing at his lips. "Actually, that's exactly what I needed to hear." Before she could question him further, he crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Zara Zimmerman, I've been trying to find the perfect moment for this, but I'm beginning to think there's no such thing. So I'll simply say it plainly, I love you. Your courage, your determination, your mind, everything about you. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Zara's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Tucker, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to give up your independence or your dreams. I'm asking to be part of them, to build something together that's stronger than what either of us could create alone." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "Will you marry me, Zara? Will you be my wife and partner in whatever comes next?" Tears pricked at Zara's eyes as emotion overwhelmed her. She had come west seeking freedom and self-sufficiency, never imagining she would find love as well, a love that didn't demand she diminish herself, but instead celebrated her strength. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining conviction as she repeated, "Yes, Tucker, I will marry you." His smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, a detail that made her laugh through her tears. "We can have it sized," Tucker said, looking slightly embarrassed. "It's perfect," Zara insisted, and sealed her acceptance with a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership. They were married in the spring of 1877, after the worst of the snows had melted, but before the planting season began in earnest. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, held in Sheridan's small church, and followed by a celebration that spilled into the streets. Alice, as matron of honor, wept openly as her brother and new sister-in-law exchanged vows. "I knew it," she told Zara afterward. "From the moment he carried you into town after the fire, I knew you were the one who would finally capture his heart." "I think it was mutual capturing," Zara replied with a smile, watching as Tucker accepted congratulations from his ranch hands. Their honeymoon was brief, a week spent at a hot springs resort, a day's journey from Sheridan, before the practical demands of ranch life and spring planting called them back. Tucker had built an addition onto his ranch house in preparation for their marriage, giving Zara a sunny room for sewing and reading. "What about my cabin?" she had asked when he first suggested she move to the ranch after their wedding. "I worked so hard to rebuild it." "It's still yours, ours," Tucker assured her. "We can use it when we need to be closer to town or lease it to someone who needs a home. But the ranch is where our future is, Zara. There's room to grow there in every sense." She understood his meaning, and he was right. The small cabin that had represented her independence now seemed like a stepping stone rather than a destination. The ranch, with its vast acreage and potential, was where they could build a legacy together. That first year of marriage brought adjustments for both of them. Tucker, accustomed to making decisions unilaterally, had to learn to consult his wife, whose practical mind and fresh perspective often improved his plans. Zara, who had prized self-sufficiency above all else, discovered the joy of true partnership, the strength that came from facing challenges together rather than alone. They worked side by side through the spring planting and summer harvest, through cattle drives and market days. Zara continued her dressmaking for select clients, but increasingly focused her attention on developing the ranch alongside Tucker. She started a substantial kitchen garden that soon supplied not only their table but provided extra produce they sold in town. She learned to ride as well as any of the ranch hands, surprising even Tucker with her natural seat and fearlessness. "You're a wonder, Mrs. Kincaid," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "I don't think there's anything you can't do once you set your mind to it." Zara leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "I had a good teacher in determination," she said. "A certain stubborn rancher who rode through fire to save a woman he barely knew." Tucker's arm tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made." As autumn approached, bringing with it the anniversary of the wildfire that had changed both their lives, Zara discovered she was expecting their first child. When she shared the news with Tucker, his joy was so complete, so unguarded that it brought tears to her eyes. "Are you happy?" he asked, holding her close. "Truly. Happier than I ever thought possible," Zara assured him. Our life is more than I dared dream of when I left Boston." The baby, a boy they named Thomas James Kincaid, was born in the spring of 1878, with Alice serving as midwife. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, evident from his first lusty cries. "He's perfect," Tucker declared, holding his son with a tenderness that made Zara fall in love with him all over again. "He is," she agreed. "And so is this life we're building." As Thomas grew, so did the Kincaid Ranch. Tucker's innovative breeding programs and Zara's shrewd business sense expanded their operations beyond cattle to include horses and sheep. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations and the challenges of frontier life, always as a team. Their family grew as well. 2 years after Thomas, they welcomed a daughter, Emily Alice, followed by another son, William Tucker, in 1882. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning responsibility alongside joy, work ethic alongside compassion. Zara never forgot the wildfire that had nearly claimed her life but had ultimately led her to love. Each year, as summer turned to fall and the grasses dried, she would ride with Tucker to the spot where he had found her, surrounded by flames. "I sometimes think the fire was a blessing in disguise," she told him on one such anniversary, their 10th. "It burned away my stubborn insistence on doing everything alone." Tucker smiled, lines of happiness crinkling around his eyes. "I've always thought of it as the moment my real life began," he admitted. "When I saw you on that hillside, something inside me knew you were my future." "A future neither of us could have imagined," Zara mused, looking back toward their ranch, where their children played under Alice's watchful eye. "And yet, exactly the one we were meant to find." As they rode home together, side by side as they had been for a decade, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her west. She had come seeking independence and had found it not in isolation, but in partnership with a man who valued her strength as much as she valued his. The wildfire that had once threatened to destroy everything had instead forged something unbreakable. A love as vast and enduring as the Wyoming sky above them. Their story became something of a legend in Sheridan County, the Eastern Lady, and the Wyoming rancher, whose love began in fire and built a dynasty. The Kincaid Ranch grew into one of the most prosperous in the territory, known for fair dealings and innovation. Their children, raised with both frontier resilience and Eastern education, carried forward their legacy, expanding the ranch and contributing to Wyoming's growth as it moved toward statehood. And on their 50th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Tucker and Zara returned once more to the hillside where their story began. The landscape had changed over half a century. Trees had grown where once there was only charred earth, and Sheridan had expanded into a proper city. But the essential truth of their journey remained. Sometimes, the greatest love stories begin in the most desperate moments, when one person risks everything to save another. "I'd ride through those flames again in a heartbeat," Tucker told his wife, his hair now white but his eyes as blue and earnest as ever. "And I'd be waiting for you," Zara replied, twining her fingers with his, "just as I always have been." Together, they watched the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of fire not destructive, but beautiful, a reminder that even in the most desperate circumstances, hope and love could emerge from the ashes, stronger and more enduring than anyone could imagine.